Alright, so in this video I am going to give you some tips on building these tops for the split top Roubo bench. Even if you're an experienced woodworker, I think you'll find some of these tips helpful because maybe you've never given some consideration to some of these different things. Tip number one is going to revolve around selecting the actual stock or the lumber for each of these laminations. You're going to want to pick pieces out of your stack that are very, very straight along their length, or as straight as you can find in your rough sawn stack. And the reason for that is they're going to be a much more stable board that you're going to be able to take and laminate together when you glue these pieces up to make that width for the top. Someday down the road, you're probably going to refurbish the top of your bench by using something like a number 7 jointer plane. And if you're right-handed like I am, you're going to want to work right to left when you're actually reflattening or refurbishing that top to get rid of some nicks and dings, just to bring it back to a nice flat reference surface again. Imagine these short pieces of scrap here are pieces that we're going to laminate together to make these tops. Why is that even important whatsoever? Well, someday when you do refurbish that top and you're going across those laminations, you don't want to get any tear out. You want the process to go as smooth as possible, no pun intended. So you may want to orient one piece this way or that way, or with a different side up or down. And there's really no easy way to do that, or no guaranteed way to do that, without giving consideration to each one of the laminations. So my suggestion is that before you go and glue anything up, you actually take one of your hand planes along the edge of each one of those laminations and you mark it so that you know exactly how you want that board to be oriented when you put those laminations together. Let me show you. Imagine this is one of your laminations for your bench top. It looks like this grain is running uphill to my left, which means I should be able to hand plane it in the normal fashion from right to left. But let's just see if that actually happens and whether or not I get any tear out or perceived tear out. This is some red oak and it seems to plane really nice in that direction. All right. Now let's try one of these other ones so we can determine whether or not this is how we want it to be. Now this one, for example, has what looks like a little bit of a change in the grain direction along the length. And it's possible that will be a factor or not be a factor. In this case, it does not seem to be a factor. It doesn't feel or look like I'm getting any tear out. So I believe I can orient that particular lamination in this fashion. Let's see what happens if I run it the other way though. Tons of tear out. Okay, you can just hear that's a different sound. And that's not going to work for laminating this bench top. And you can even see the tear out right in here. That is just very, very obvious. But it looks like I could almost plane this in either direction given the way that the grain looks on the side of the board. And we'll just go through and do that with every single lamination so that we know exactly how they're going to be. And that feels nice. I don't hear tear out and I don't feel tear out either. So if we were going to use that one for a lamination of the top, we would do the same thing. Mark this left and right with an arrow facing up, and that way we know exactly how it's going to be oriented in our bench top. So this is how I put the marks on the ends of these boards. An arrow indicating the top surface, which will be the top of the bench, and this is the right end, so you would plane from right to left, and the same on the other side, arrow with an L for the left end. Once you've got all your lumber selected and you've figured out that grain direction trick that I was just showing you, you're pretty well ready to start milling up the lumber using the joiner and the planer and getting the laminations actually ready to glue together. I'm going to skip over most of that. It's pretty straightforward. Basically just mill up the lumber and try to take an equal amount off of each side so that your laminations stay as straight as possible over the course of time. When you do apply the glue to the laminations, keep in mind that glue is slippery and it's going to want to make those laminations slide end to end or twist a little bit or misalign. So you're not going to get a perfect flat seam. So what I like to do to help with that alignment is I like to put some biscuits in between the laminations. I put them up about 1/2 inch from the bottom surface, and they're not going to obviously be cut into the outside laminations or on the inside laminations where that gap stop is, and they don't provide any strength whatsoever. They really only are for alignment purposes, and even with those biscuits in there, you're not going to get those laminations perfectly aligned. They're going to be close, but you're still going to have to go back and flatten those seams out somehow, whether it's with your jointer or a hand plane. So make sure you leave those laminations wider than the 4 inches required for the split top Roubo bench. I went about 4 1/8 of an inch for the overall height or the width of these laminations. The rear top section of the split top Roubo bench is very straightforward. It's just a bunch of laminations. It's a great big slab. The front top section, on the other hand, has a couple of careful considerations you need to pay attention to. There's a section here that is just 5 laminations. Then you've got the bench dog strip, and you've got the front laminate. Now, you need to give a bit of consideration to this bench dog strip because in the plans, the way that they tell you to do things is to make it up in 2 pieces essentially. So you've got this one section where your dog holes are going to be cut through, and then you've got another thin lamination in here, which the plans actually tell you to make out of soft maple or the same species as the rest of your top. Now, I got a pretty cool tip from Rob Cosman about putting a contrasting piece of wood in here, which is what I ended up doing, obviously, that you can see. And let me show you why I did that. When you put a piece of wood in your vise that you might want to cut tenons on, for example, or dovetails, you can use that piece of contrasting wood in that dog hole strip to be able to find plumb so that it acts like a winding stick almost, especially with something like maple here. Now, it's hard for me to do this on camera, but I think you get the idea that you can use this edge here along with the other contrasting wood to sight and know whether or not you've actually got your workpiece fairly plumb or square to the bench top. Okay, and when you throw a square on there, you'll see that it actually is. When you do make this dog hole strip, I highly recommend that you do make it in 2 pieces. Whether you use that contrasting piece of wood or not, it's totally up to you. But making it in 2 pieces really streamlines the process because you can make these dog holes using a jig. Spend some time to make a really simple jig. You've got a 2-degree angle on it, and you can use a pattern bit in your router to follow along that actual template so that you can get a consistent, repeatable dog hole for each and every single one of these. It'll make producing the actual bench dogs much easier because then you know exactly how thick each one of them has to be and the width of every single one of them because you get a very consistent result. I can't imagine sitting here hammering away with a chisel and a hammer from the top down to make each and every one of these. That just seems so inefficient. Making the houndstooth dovetails and installing the tail vise really is not all that difficult. These look a lot harder than what they really are. So make sure to subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss the next video or 2 that I put out that deals with how to actually make these and how to install the tail vise. Until next time, go build something beautiful.